There's a particular ache that comes from being the woman everyone assumes must be lonely. It's not spoken directly, of course, not in polite company. It lingers in the raised eyebrows, the well-meaning, still no little ones yet. The pity in their eyes burns hotter than cruelty ever could. I used to flinch at it. Used to question myself. But not anymore. My name is Eleanor. I'm 48 now, and if you're expecting a tale of regret, you're in the wrong story. I never married, never had children. Not because I was unloved or unwanted, but because my love, the kind that runs deep as mountain roots and clear as spring water, was poured elsewhere. Into people. Into ideas. Into a future no one saw coming. I remember the first time I realized that my friends, those women with whom I'd shared tears and secrets and teenage dreams, had begun to see me differently. It was at Lillian's baby shower years ago. We were still in our early 30s, and the room was thick with laughter, tissue paper, and unsolicited parenting advice. "You'll understand once you have your own," someone said, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The others nodded as if that was gospel truth, and I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. In that moment, I didn't feel inferior. I felt invisible. The years passed. Baby showers turned into school plays, which turned into graduation parties, and eventually weddings for their grown children. I was always invited, always present, always quietly observing. I brought thoughtful gifts, helped clean up after parties, and offered listening ears during divorces and crises. But when conversations turned to parenting, the trials and glories, I was politely excluded. Not by words, but by omission. They thought I hadn't given life. But they had no idea what I had built. Behind the scenes, in the quiet hours when the world turned inward, I was crafting something that would outlast birthday candles and report cards. A legacy stitched not in bloodlines, but in opportunities. I had taken every penny I would have spent on private schools, piano lessons, orthodontics, and college tuition, and invested it. Methodically. Patiently. Year after year. I called it the Horizon Fund. It started modestly, $500 a month tucked away in a high-yield account. Then stocks. Then real estate. I studied financial strategies while others read parenting blogs. I watched compound interest bloom like wildflowers in spring. By the time I turned 47, the Horizon Fund was valued at just over $3.2 million. And with it, I opened the Eleanor Grace Foundation, a nonprofit scholarship program for first-generation college students. It launched quietly, with no fanfare. But word spread fast. The local paper picked up the story. Then regional news. Applications flooded in like letters to Santa. And that's when I saw them, my old friends. Lillian. Marcy. Diane. In the crowd at the community center, standing in line like everyone else. Holding applications in trembling hands. Not for themselves, but for their children. I recognized the disbelief first. The subtle double-take. The dawning realization as they approached the table and saw the name engraved on the brass plaque above the banner, the Eleanor Grace Foundation, building futures without boundaries. When Lillian reached the front, she leaned in, her voice hushed. "Ellie, I didn't realize this was your foundation." I smiled. Softly, kindly, like the woman I'd always been. "For you," I said, "only according to the general rules." Her eyes searched mine for bitterness. But I offered none. I had nothing to prove. I was already whole. The air that day had the kind of stillness you only notice after a loud storm, thick with things unsaid. My words to Lillian hadn't been cruel, but they landed with the weight of years. She looked down at the application in her hands, then up at me again, as if seeing me for the first time. I watched as the realization settled behind her eyes, not just of who I had become, but of who I had always been, and how she and the others had chosen not to see it. Marcy was next. She always had the strongest opinions, loudest laughs, and sharpest digs. "Eleanor, is this your way of punishing us?" she asked, her voice half a whisper, half accusation. "No," I replied, calm as still water. It's my way of contributing. Just not in the way you expected. Because that was always the way with them. Expectations. Assumptions. If you weren't married with 2 children and a golden retriever by 35, you were either broken or bitter. I was neither. I was something far more dangerous. I was free. They had laughed, once, quietly, behind wine glasses and at book club meetings, about how I would grow old alone. About how sad it must be not to have someone calling me mom. What they never asked was whether I'd made that choice with intention. Whether solitude might sometimes be sacred, not sorrowful. But that was all right. They were never meant to understand. After the application review process, we awarded 20 scholarships. 20 lives forever shifted by the quiet work I had done in the background. And as the names were announced in that old auditorium where our children, well, theirs had performed school plays and spelling bees, I felt a strange hush settle over the room. There was no applause. Just awe. And, in some cases, shame. Later that evening, Marcy approached me again, this time with a gentleness I had never known from her. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. I thought about that. About the nights I'd sat alone with a cup of chamomile and spreadsheets glowing softly on my laptop. About the years I'd been the +1 at baby showers, the designated helper at PDA fundraisers I had no real reason to attend, the dutiful listener when their marriages cracked and careers stalled. Would it have mattered? I asked her, not unkindly. Would you have listened? She didn't answer. Just stood there, blinking. The truth is, I never needed their approval. I longed for respect, yes. Who doesn't? But I learned long ago that the only validation that matters is the kind you build within. The kind rooted in purpose, not performance. In values, not validation. After the ceremony, I walked through the echoing halls of the community center alone, my heels tapping softly against the worn linoleum. On a bulletin board near the entrance hung a photo of this year's graduating class, smiling, radiant, unaware of the paths behind them that had just been cleared. Beneath it, someone had pinned a small note, written in looping cursive, to the one who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. It wasn't signed, but I knew. And that note, more than the numbers in the fund, more than the shocked expressions and belated praise, meant everything. Because legacy, I've come to understand, is not about who remembers your name. There's a drawer in my study, second one from the top on the left, that no one has ever seen me open. It doesn't hold anything particularly valuable in the conventional sense, no deeds or jewelry, no stacks of money or heirloom letters. It holds memory, written in paper cuts and ink, pressed into the pages of journals no one ever asked to read. It began as a habit. After each gathering where I felt diminished, laughed off, talked over, dismissed, I'd come home and write. Not in rage, but in record. October 14th, Marcy laughed when I said I was researching compound ETFs. Said, well, I guess you have to do something with all that spare time. I'd write it down. Then I'd write how I felt. The burn in my chest. The smile I held too long. The sentence I swallowed to keep the peace. Over the years, those notebooks became my witnesses. Silent. Steady. They reminded me I wasn't imagining it, that the subtle slights and quiet exclusions were real. That I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or bitter. I was just inconvenient in a world built for sameness. I used to wonder if I was wrong for not defending myself more forcefully, for not snapping back, for letting the jokes pass with a smile. But now I see the strength it took to absorb, reflect, and redirect all that energy into something greater. Something tangible. Something that now bore the names of 20 students walking into brighter futures. One of those students, Maya, wrote me a letter after the awards ceremony. She didn't know me beyond the formal announcement, the speech I gave about opportunity and resilience. But she knew enough. Dear Miss Carter, it began, her handwriting round and careful. I was raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. No one in my family has ever gone to college. This scholarship means I can study biomedical engineering without the constant fear of dropping out due to tuition. I just wanted you to know, You changed the trajectory of my life. And someday, I want to do the same for someone else. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in that same drawer, beneath the journal entries, beneath the years of invisible bruises. It fit perfectly. Like the answer to a question I'd asked for decades. Was it all worth it? Yes. Unequivocally, yes. Because this isn't a story of revenge. Not truly. It's a story of reclamation. Of planting seeds others mocked, and watching them bloom in the very fields where you were told nothing would grow. At our next book club meeting, I sat in the same chair I'd always used. Worn brown leather, third from the window. Lillian brought lemon bars. Diane wore her pearls. They talked about college tours and tuition woes, about how kids these days just don't appreciate what they have. No one mentioned the foundation. Not directly. But their eyes lingered longer when they looked at me. Their voices softened when they asked questions. Marcy offered to refill my tea, unprompted. Small shifts, but meaningful. And I smiled. Not because I needed their approval now, but because I had finally, silently, changed the conversation. They were no longer laughing. They were learning. One quietly, uncomfortable realization at a time. I've always kept a garden, small, neat, nothing extravagant. Mostly herbs and low-maintenance flowers that return each spring with quiet persistence. Lavender, rosemary, marigolds. Perennials. Things that know how to come back. When the foundation was launched, I held the first board meeting under the old pergola in that very garden. It was early autumn, the air crisp and clean, the kind that smells of wood smoke and second chances. The leaves were just beginning to turn, flickers of orange and gold weaving through the trees like reluctant confessions. There were 4 of us on the board, myself, Clara and Gwyn, a retired teacher, and my first investor, Deshaun Hill, a lawyer who grew up in the foster system, and Alicia Romero, a nonprofit consultant who had once been a scholarship recipient herself. None of us were famous or rich by conventional standards. But we were all builders of lives, of stories, of escape routes from small boxes. As we sat sipping tea from mismatched mugs, Clara leaned back and said, "You know, Eleanor, this could have been something quiet. Something anonymous. Why did you choose to put your name on it?" I paused, fingering the handle of my cup. I think I said slowly that I spent enough years being invisible. It's not about ego. It's about legacy. I want young women to see my name and know they don't have to explain their choices or apologize for their ambitions. I want them to know they're allowed to choose a different map and that the road less traveled isn't a failure. It's a strategy. Deshaun nodded, his gaze soft. You want to make the quiet ones visible. Exactly. That word, strategy, has always felt more truthful to me than dream. I never dreamed of revenge. I calculated my way toward peace. I budgeted for freedom. I spreadsheeted my way into power. And in doing so, I discovered the kind of autonomy that no dinner party story or Instagram perfect family photo could rival. Later that week, I received another letter, this one from a mother. It was short, typed on pink stationery with a subtle floral watermark. "Ms. Carter," it read, "I don't know you, but I wanted to thank you for giving my daughter her first chance. We couldn't afford college, and I didn't want to tell her that her dreams were too expensive. You gave her something I couldn't. And because of you, I no longer feel like a failure." That one I read twice. Then I went out to the garden. I didn't plant anything that day. Just walked the paths I'd worn into the soil over the years. Touched the leaves. Breathed the changing air. A few doors down, I could hear Marcy's voice, loud and bright, as she called her son in for dinner. For years I would have felt the ache, that sharp reminder of what I supposedly lacked. But not anymore. I looked up at the sky, a wide sweep of dusk pink and lavender, and whispered to no one in particular, "I have given birth to something, too. Just not the way you expected. Some women birth children. Some birth change. And some, like me, do both. Just not in the way anyone sees coming." It was Marcy again who suggested the dinner. A reconnection meal, she called it, as if friendships were dusty shelves that just needed a good polishing. I accepted, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. There's something fascinating about watching people recalibrate around a new version of you, especially when that version has outgrown the story they always told. We met at a restaurant they used to frequent without me. One of those upscale spots with exposed brick walls, dim lighting, and waiters who pretend not to judge when you mispronounce the wine list. I wore navy blue, structured, quiet power. No need for flamboyance. Dignity doesn't shout. They greeted me with kisses on the cheek and that slightly breathless tone reserved for people who have realized, too late, that they were wrong. Marcy ordered the wine. Diane leaned in with her signature half-whisper. We're just so proud of what you've done, Ellie. It's incredible, really. I nodded, accepting the words without the need to savor them. Pride, when offered after the fact, feels more like a souvenir than a gift. The conversation meandered through familiar territories, college tuitions, adolescent rebellion, and the general fatigue of midlife parenting. But it circled me often tentatively, like someone trying to pet a cat who once scratched them. And you? Lillian finally asked, placing her glass down. What's next for you? It was an honest question. One I hadn't been truly asked, in years. I'm expanding the foundation, I said. We're introducing a mentorship program, connecting scholarship recipients with women in their desired fields. That's brilliant, Diane murmured. You've really become someone. I smiled. Not the polite one. The real one. I always was. Their silence hung like crystal in the air. Fragile, clear, beautiful. For years I'd been the empty seat at their dinner table, the unmarried, childless anomaly they couldn't quite fold into their narrative. I was the question mark they decorated with pity and occasional curiosity. But now I wasn't a question anymore. I was the answer they hadn't anticipated. After dinner, as we lingered outside waiting for valets and pretending the wind wasn't cutting through our coats, Marcy hugged me. I hope we haven't lost you, she said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You never really had me, I replied. But you're welcome to know me now. Her eyes shone not with tears, but with understanding. Some bridges don't need to burn. They just need to be crossed in silence, with reverence, and without the weight of old expectations. As I drove home, the city lights flickered like tiny compass points on a map I'd drawn myself. I thought of my younger self, the one who sat through baby showers and smiled through condescension, who journaled her ache and still showed up with gifts. I wanted to tell her, hold on. It gets better. One day they'll see. Not because you shouted louder, but because you built something they cannot ignore. And the best part? You did it without ever needing to ask their permission. It was a Tuesday, clear skies, cool breeze, the kind of autumn day that makes you believe endings can be beautiful too. I was in my home office, finalizing donor updates for the Eleanor Grace Foundation when the email came. Subject line, Urgent Grant Inquiry, Carter College Fund. I recognized the sender immediately. Amanda Collins, Diane's daughter. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the cursor blinking like a silent metronome. Amanda was in her final year of pre-med at a private university. Tuition had increased. Diane had mentioned it, offhand, at dinner. Amanda's message was professional, careful. Dear Ms. Carter, I'm reaching out in hopes of learning more about the emergency grant option your foundation offers. My financial aid was unexpectedly reduced this semester, and I'm facing a tuition shortfall that could prevent me from graduating on time. It was signed respectfully, Amanda Collins. No mention of Diane. No mention of our long history. Just need, typed plainly, humbly. I forwarded the email to Clara and Alicia with a short note. Please prioritize this one. She's earned it. We reviewed her application. She was stellar. Focused, hardworking. She had a part-time job, stellar grades, glowing professor endorsements. The kind of student our foundation existed to support. We approved the grant. But I asked Clara to send the notification. I didn't need thanks. Not from Diane. Not even from Amanda. This wasn't about ego. It was about balance. Restoration. A few days later, a card arrived in my mailbox. Handwritten. Cream-colored paper, gold trim. Dear Eleanor, I hope you don't mind Amanda reaching out. We didn't want to put you in an awkward position. I just wanted you to know how deeply grateful we are. Truly. We never imagined that someday we might be the ones standing in that line. Warmly, Diane. I placed the card in the drawer beneath Maya's letter. Each note like a stone in the foundation I'd built from silence. Each word a piece of recognition I no longer needed, but had earned all the same. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same women who once laughed behind cupped hands now had children, depending on the very structure I was told could never stand. It's not that I rejoiced in their struggle. I didn't. But there was a quiet vindication in watching my life, once labeled empty, become the reservoir they now drew from. Not because I changed to meet their expectations, but because I didn't. The Sunday after Amanda's grant was approved, I went to the farmer's market like I always did. A ritual as rooted in me as the herbs in my garden, quiet, simple, grounding. I was choosing apples Honeycrisp, the tart kind I liked for baking, when I heard my name. Eleanor. It was Diane. No makeup, her hair pulled back, wearing the kind of tired you can't disguise with pearls. She held a cloth bag, half filled with greens, and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not pity. Not surprise. Something more vulnerable. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. Really? You didn't have to. I placed the last apple in my basket and looked at her, straight and calm. You're right, I said. I didn't. She laughed softly. It wasn't bitter. Just real. For a long time, the women I grew up beside operated under a simple rule. Generosity was expected of those who had little power. The helpers. The unmarried. The childless. Our giving was never framed as noble, it was assumed, like air or service. But now, things had shifted. I wasn't the helper anymore. I was the gate. That realization didn't make me cruel. If anything, it softened me. Because I had stood on both sides of that gate, welcomed by none, useful to many. And I knew too well what it meant to be invisible. Diane fidgeted with the strap of her bag. I think I never understood how much strength it takes to do what you've done. To give without demanding. To build without boasting. It's not strength, I replied. It's choice. And clarity. She nodded. Then, without warning, reached into her bag and pulled out a small jar of homemade preserves. Here, she said, holding it out. Plum and ginger. I know it's not much, but I took it. And for a moment, just a breath, we weren't the versions of ourselves built by old wounds. We were two women in a marketplace, passing something warm between us. Something like understanding. That night, I placed the jar on my kitchen shelf. Not because I needed the jam, but because it reminded me that sometimes, when you stop asking to be seen, people finally start looking. Not everyone forgot who I was before the accolades. There was Clara, of course, my first investor, my oldest friend. And Mrs. Everly, my high school literature teacher, who once told me I had the soul of a lighthouse and the patience of the tide. But the one who surprised me most was Jonah. Jonah Reyes, from the row house 2 streets over. He used to mow lawns in our neighborhood during high school summers, mine included. We were the same age, but our paths had diverged so sharply I almost didn't recognize him when we crossed paths at the community leadership banquet. He had that same uneven smile, though, the one that made you feel like you were in on a secret. I read about you, he said, shaking my hand like he meant it. And I wasn't the least bit surprised. You weren't. He laughed. Ellie, you were the only kid I knew who kept a notebook with color-coded tabs for your lemonade stand budget. Of course you'd grow up to outbuild half the city. That memory flickered back like a home movie, 10-year-old me scribbling costs and predictions while the other kids just poured juice and shouted at passing cars. Even then, I wasn't interested in the noise. I was building something that could last. Jonah had gone into youth services after college. He now ran a mentorship initiative for at-risk teens and was interested in partnering with the foundation. As we talked, I felt something warm unfurl in my chest, not pride, exactly, but connection. Recognition. He hadn't watched me through the lens of who I hadn't become. He'd remembered who I was all along. That night, I dug out one of my oldest journals. The early pages were filled with shaky handwriting and dreams too big to say aloud back then, of changing lives, of giving others the kind of foundation I'd never been offered. Near the back was a note I had written at 22, after a particularly painful brunch where Lillian had casually mentioned not everyone's cut out for motherhood while looking directly at me. I had come home, curled on the couch, and written, "Someday, they'll realize motherhood isn't the only way to create a legacy. And when they do, I'll be too busy mothering 1,000 tomorrows to remind them." I ran my fingers over the ink, faded now. But still true. Still mine. That's the thing about the overlooked. We're not waiting to be chosen. We're preparing. And when our moment arrives, it's not a spotlight we seek, it's sunlight, steady and sustaining, that allows others to grow. There comes a moment in a woman's life, if she's lucky, if she's patient, if she has bled in silence long enough, when she realizes she no longer needs an invitation. To the table, to the conversation, to their tightly gated circle of approval. She builds her own table. And it is wide. And it is strong. Mine sits in a sun-drenched room with tall windows and books lining every wall. The wood is warm and worn, sanded smooth by years of careful use. It's not the most expensive, not the most polished, but it holds the weight of truth, and that makes it priceless. I started inviting people to this table long before I had anything to offer them. Quiet people. Overlooked people. Students who were told they weren't cut out for more. Women who left marriages with nothing but a suitcase and their children's trust. Men who had been dismissed because they didn't speak in the language of aggression. People like me, soft-spoken, often dismissed, underestimated to the point of invisibility. They showed up hungry, not just for food, but for space. For dignity. And I fed them. With mentorship, with scholarships, with time. With belief. The first full-circle moment came 2 weeks after our second cohort of scholars graduated. Maya, the girl who once wrote to me about her single mother and her dream of becoming an engineer, sent me a message. It read, "Miss Carter, I just accepted a job at a renewable energy startup in Seattle. They asked me how I knew I could make a difference in a male-dominated field. I told them it's because a woman who had no children still managed to mother a future I'd get to be part of. I hope you're proud. I hope I made you proud." I read that message in the same room where my foundation was born. The same room where I once cried over friendships that vanished with each passing year. The same room where I had sat, so many nights, asking myself if the cost of walking a path alone was worth the quiet that came with it. And now, the quiet was filled with echoes. Voices. Gratitude. Lives unfolding. One evening, I hosted a dinner at my house, not for family, not for old friends seeking redemption, but for the young women the foundation had supported. 10 of them, from different years and different lives. Some in medicine, some in law, some in the arts. All glowing in the early dusk as they found their seats at that wide, strong table. We served homemade food. Laughed loudly. Passed plates and stories and lessons. And for the first time, I said aloud what I had only ever written in private. They laughed because I didn't have children. But I was raising something all along: possibility. Resilience. Women like you. They didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me with the kind of recognition I used to beg from my own blood. Then Maya lifted her glass. To the woman who made room for us before she had any herself. And just like that, the table I built, the life I created, not despite their absence, but because of it, became more than mine. It became a legacy. It wasn't until year 3 of the foundation's growth that the ripple truly reached my old circle. Not just whispers or polite nods across grocery aisles, but real engagement. They began to show up. At first, it was through their children. An email from Marcy's son, a resume forwarded by Diane's nephew, a phone call from Lillian's daughter asking about internship placements. They didn't use their mother's names, perhaps by instruction, or perhaps from an instinct not to draw the wrong kind of attention, but I recognized them anyway. The cadence, the surnames, the uncomfortable pause when I answered the phone. And then, one afternoon, Diane herself appeared. I was at the community center for a board meeting when I saw her standing in the foyer, her hands clutching a folder like it was a lifeline. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said quickly, the moment she saw me. I wanted to see it. What you've built." I nodded. "It's open to all." She walked slowly through the space, pausing to look at the wall of graduates, their framed photos and short bios. Some were smiling in medical coats. Others were standing in courtrooms, art studios, classrooms. A hallway of futures. Diane turned to me, tears prickling at the edges of her eyes. "We mocked you," she said. "All those years. We never said it aloud, but we pitied you. We didn't know. We didn't ask. And when you rose, it humbled us. There are moments when you want to scream. Then why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you call me on my birthday? Why didn't you stand up for me when I was reduced to a punchline?" But I didn't ask those things. Because I already had the answer. "I forgave you long before you came here," I said softly. "I had to. Or I wouldn't have been able to keep building." She let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for decades. That's the thing about being made invisible. Eventually, you start to see through others instead of to them. You learn to look for need beneath pride, fear beneath arrogance. You learn to listen even when no one's speaking. Diane didn't ask for a favor. And I didn't offer one. But when she left, she touched my arm gently and said, "I don't think we could have done what you did." "You could have," I said. "You just didn't want to do it alone." She nodded. And in her silence, I heard the truth. Some of us are meant to walk first. Not because we're stronger, but because we learned, young, how to survive without applause. I hadn't planned for them to find it, not my board, not the scholars, and certainly not the press. It was a letter I wrote one winter evening, never mailed. Just ink on linen paper, folded twice and tucked into the back of a drawer alongside old receipts and unused thank you cards. It was addressed to no one and everyone. To the women who laughed when I said I was building something. To the ones who asked, still no kids, like I was late to a parade that had already passed. To the family who passed around baby photos like heirlooms, but never thought to ask what I was creating with my hands, my mind, my time. I forgave you when you weren't sorry. Not for you, but for me. Because I realized something. I did have children. Hundreds of them. They're not born of my body, but of my belief. They wear stethoscopes and graduation robes. They stand in courtrooms and at lab benches. They write code and poetry. They pay it forward without ever knowing my full name. I mothered minds, not babies. I birthed futures, not heirs. And no matter what stories you once told at wine-soaked brunches, in rooms I was no longer invited to, the ending is mine now. Signed. The woman you couldn't define. I'd written it for catharsis. For closure. I never expected it to leave the drawer. But one day, during a volunteer cleanup event at the foundation, a student named Yasmin found it while sorting through old office supplies. She read it. And without asking, she shared it with her peers, with her professor, and eventually with a local journalist who was doing a feature on the foundation. When I saw it printed on the second page of the Sunday paper under the headline, "A Legacy Letter from the Woman Who Chose a Different Path," my first reaction was shock. But then, something unexpected happened. The emails began. Messages from strangers, some as young as 18, others in their 60s, who said they'd clipped the letter and hung it by their desks, who said they cried, who said for the first time in their lives, they felt seen. One woman wrote, "I've spent 40 years thinking I was selfish for not having children. Today, I finally feel whole." Another, "I thought choosing my career made me lesser. But your words reminded me I've been building something too. I didn't need fame. I didn't want attention. But I did want the truth to echo. And now it was." That letter, born from a place of solitude, had become something else entirely, a lighthouse for the quietly powerful. The women who never got a baby shower or a Mother's Day card, but gave everything they had anyway. The women who built worlds instead of nurseries. The ones who mothered futures without ever being called mom. And in that moment, I knew something sacred. Even the words we never mean to share can become lifelines. Especially the ones we wrote in the dark. It was spring when Jordan arrived at my office door, 15 years old, all elbows and silence, carrying a notebook he never let go of and eyes that looked far older than they should. He had been referred by one of our partner schools, flagged as exceptionally gifted, but increasingly withdrawn. I remember the way he hovered at the threshold, unsure if he was allowed to enter. There was something achingly familiar about that hesitation. The way someone steps around a room not built for them. "Come in," I said gently. "That chair by the window is the best one." He took it, carefully, like it might vanish if he moved too fast. We didn't talk much that first day. He handed me his test scores, perfect math, advanced reading, abysmal attendance. A pattern I'd seen before. Brilliant kids who stopped showing up to places that didn't see them. I didn't ask why. Instead, I handed him a book from the shelf behind me. "The Alchemist," I said. "If you read it, come back. If you don't, come back anyway." He returned the next week. Then the next. And over the course of months, something strange happened. I began to care for this boy the way I imagine a mother does. Not the way television teaches you, but in the subtle ways. I started keeping snacks in the drawer. A spare charger in the bottom cabinet because his phone always died. I memorized his schedule. I noticed the days he came in with his hoodie pulled tight and the ones he came in humming. He never called me anything other than Miss Carter. But one afternoon, as he packed up to leave, he said, "I told my science teacher you were my mentor. Is that okay?" My throat caught, because I knew what he was really asking. "Yes, Jordan," I said. "That's very okay." A year later, he gave the closing speech at our scholarship gala. He stood on that stage, lanky in a suit 2 sizes too big, and said, "I don't have a mother. But I have Miss Carter. And she's the reason I'm going to college." In the back row, I sat frozen. No one turned to look at me. No applause specifically for me. But I felt the weight of those words settle into my bones like sunlight into earth. That was the moment I realized something sacred. It doesn't matter whether the world calls you a mother. What matters is who looks at you and says, "I am because you were there." The invitation came on cream cardstock with gold embossed letters, addressed in Marcy's elegant script that had once graded my school essays in red ink and social niceties in whispers behind closed doors. It was for her daughter Emily's baby shower. I hadn't seen Emily in years, though I remembered when she was small, curly-haired, and wide-eyed, always peeking around corners during our old book club meetings. Back then, I used to bring her little notebooks and colored pens, quietly feeding her love of stories while the adults discussed mortgages and misbehaving husbands. The envelope lay on my table for days before I opened it. I didn't need to read the details. I already knew what it would be: brunch, pastel colors, sugared cakes, cooing over the miracle of life. A table full of women who once laughed when I chose a different path. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't going. Instead, I sent a different kind of gift. A letter folded and slipped into a slim envelope, accompanied by a check, made out to a college savings account I'd set up in the baby's name. The note read, "Dear Emily, you may not remember, but once, a long time ago, I gave you your first storybook. You sat beside me on the floor and told me your favorite part was the girl who found her way without a map. I hope your child always finds the courage to do the same. Congratulations. May their world be wide. Warmly, Eleanor." I never heard back. But months later, I saw Emily at a community event, holding her infant son, her eyes searching the crowd until they met mine. She didn't wave. She didn't come over. But she mouthed, "Thank you." And that was enough. I'd long since stopped waiting for proper acknowledgments. Because real impact often moves in silence, like roots growing beneath the soil, unseen but unshakable. That day, I walked home beneath a sunset too beautiful to deserve description. I thought about all the women I knew who measured their worth in birth announcements and family portraits. And I thought about mine. In changed lives. In open doors. In the quiet knowledge that when the world said, "You don't count," I counted anyway. And left the ledger open for those who came next. It was the 5th annual Eleanor Grace Foundation Gala, a milestone marked by soft jazz, clinking glasses, and the low hum of lives that had grown from seed to bloom. The ballroom shimmered with soft light, and the air smelled of lilacs and old dreams come true. Years earlier, I would have walked into a room like this dreading the questions. "Are you here alone? No children yet? Still focusing on your career?" They asked with smiles, of course. Always smiles. But the undertone was clear. You don't belong here unless you come with proof of your place, spouse, child, status. But this night was different. This night, I was the host. I stood at the entrance in a midnight blue dress, not expensive, but tailored to the life I had built, and welcomed guests with the ease of someone who no longer needed permission to exist. The first hour passed in a blur of warm greetings, hugs from former scholars now thriving in jobs across the country, donors shaking my hand with increasing reverence, and young women who looked at me not as a cautionary tale, but as a blueprint. No one asked who I was with. No one questioned my still. They just saw me. Whole. Jordan was there too. Now a sophomore studying engineering, he had grown into his frame, his smile more sure. He brought a girl named Chloe, and I caught him nervously fixing his tie before they reached the main table. "You're allowed to be proud, you know," he whispered, glancing at the name etched on the plaque by the stage, Eleanor Grace Foundation Founders Circle. "I am," I said. "I just learned to show it quietly." That night, as I watched speaker after speaker thank our team, tell stories of scholarships that changed their trajectories, share photos of first apartments and graduation robes and fledgling businesses, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt arrival. Not at someone else's table. At mine. A woman approached me near the dessert table. Older. Soft-spoken. Her eyes glistening. "My daughter was awarded a scholarship this year," she said. "She was going to drop out before your foundation stepped in. I just wanted to thank you. I don't know how you did it all without children of your own." She trailed off, embarrassed by her own words. I smiled gently. "I have many," I said. "They just don't all share my last name." After the gala ended and the last guest had gone, I lingered. The hotel staff moved quietly around me, clearing linens, folding chairs, wiping away the traces of celebration. But I remained by the far window, watching my reflection in the dark glass. It's funny how rare it is to truly see oneself in moments of stillness. How many years I spent searching other people's eyes for validation, scanning their expressions like a mirror. But here, in the hush, after the praise and the handshakes and the toasts, I saw her clearly. The girl who once brought cupcakes to everyone else's celebrations, but never had one of her own. The woman who was asked to plan weddings she was never invited to dance at. The heart that beats steadily through silence, through slights, through being forgotten. She had not hardened. She had deepened. Behind me on the banquet table was a framed quote we used for the program. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build that others live inside of." That line had been mine, scribbled in a notebook during the foundation's earliest days, when the balance in our account was just a few thousand and my name had no weight outside of spreadsheets. Now it sat under spotlight on gold-trimmed paper. A small movement in the reflection caught my eye. Jordan, still in his wrinkled suit, leaning against the far wall with a half-empty glass of ginger ale. "You okay?" he asked, approaching. I nodded. "Just thinking." He joined me at the window. "I used to wonder," he said quietly, "what it would have been like to have a real mom. But then I got older and realized something." I turned toward him. "Being a mom isn't about biology or casseroles," he continued. "It's about who shows up. Who believes in you when no one else does." He looked down at the floor, then back at me. "You did that. For a lot of us. The moment didn't need fanfare. It didn't need applause. Just truth. I touched his arm. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it not just for the words, but for seeing me fully. That night, I walked home. Past glowing windows of homes filled with lullabies and leftover toys, past parks that once hosted birthday parties I never threw. And for the first time, I didn't feel outside at all. Because what I had built, in the quiet hours and the unseen labor, had outgrown any single home or title. I had become the kind of woman who mothers futures. And I no longer needed the world to catch up to that truth. It was Lillian's youngest, Rebecca, getting married now. I hadn't been invited to her other daughter's wedding years earlier, not formally anyway. I'd seen the photos online, the curated perfection of it all. White roses, a cathedral veil, the caption, "Surrounded by all who love us most." And I hadn't made the cut. So when the second invitation arrived, hand-delivered and wrapped in ivory lace, I hesitated. Not out of resentment, but out of clarity. I called Clara that evening. She always offered the right blend of honesty and grace. The kind that doesn't bruise you, but doesn't let you lie to yourself either. "You don't owe them anything," she said, stirring her tea. "But if you want to go on your terms." My terms. So I wore slate gray. Not black, not mourning, but not celebration either. A color that said, "I am here, but I am not performing for you." The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Candlelight and string quartets, whispered vows and choreographed smiles. I watched from the fourth pew, not near enough to be family, not far enough to be forgotten. Lillian found me at the reception, her champagne glass trembling slightly. "I'm glad you came," she said. I nodded. "So am I." We stood in silence, the kind packed with unspoken memories. She glanced at the dance floor, where Rebecca was swaying with her new husband under golden lights. "I remember when you helped plan my baby shower," Lillian said, her voice softer now. "You made those tiny book-shaped favors. Everyone loved them." I smiled. "They were hollow inside. Held chocolates." She laughed. "I didn't know that." "Of course you thought of that." Then her voice faltered. "We weren't fair to you. For a long time. I don't know if we ever truly saw you." "I know," I said, not with bitterness, but with a calm that comes only when the wound no longer bleeds. "But I see you now," she added. "I really do." And while part of me wanted to say, "Too late," another part, the part that still chose grace, simply replied, "Thank you." That night, I slipped away early, before the bouquet toss and the cake cutting. I didn't need to be part of the staged memories. Outside, the night air was crisp and clean. I looked up at the sky and thought, not of the past, but of the girls who had written to me this month, new scholars, eager to begin. Girls who had been invisible in their own families, but who now had a place where they were seen, celebrated, supported. In the dark, I whispered something just for them. "I built this for you." And I kept walking. There was a time I dreaded birthdays. Not because of the years stacking like brittle china, but because of the charade they often required. The cake I didn't choose. The small talk I never enjoyed. The gifts that were really gestures of obligation. One year, my 38th, I sat at a table in Marcy's kitchen while everyone else laughed about minivans and husbands who couldn't load dishwashers correctly. I smiled, nodded, laughed when expected, then went home and cried into a cup of tea. It wasn't that I wanted their lives. It was that I had spent so long being told mine was lesser, that I started to believe I had nothing to celebrate. But on my 45th birthday, something changed. I took the day off. No gala. No brunch. No calls I didn't want to answer. Just me. I made cinnamon toast the way my grandmother used to. Thick bread, crusted sugar, a pinch of nutmeg. I wore soft linen and sat in the garden, letting the light fall where it pleased. Around noon, I walked to the art museum. No rush, no agenda. Just the quiet pleasure of moving at my own pace. In one of the smaller galleries, I found a new exhibit, sculptures made from discarded metal and broken glass. They caught the light in strange, lovely ways. Pieces no one wanted, reshaped into beauty. I stood in front of one, tall, abstract, with sharp edges softened by fire and time, and felt something stir in my chest. "That's you," something whispered. When I got home, a small box waited at my door. No return address. Inside was a single object, a bookmark. Handcrafted, pressed metal with the words etched deep. To the woman who made being forgotten into something unforgettable. There was no note, but I knew it was from one of the girls. One of the ones who had been told they didn't count. One of the ones who sat, once, in the shadow I had long lived inside, until I taught them to stand up. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted no one. And everyone. To the little girl who once prayed to disappear because it hurt too much to be overlooked. To the woman who carried her through. To the dreams I gave up that made room for something even greater. To the life I had chosen, deliberate, meaningful, built brick by brick in the quiet hours. It was the best birthday I ever had. Not because I was surrounded by love, but because I was surrounded by peace. And sometimes, peace is the love you give yourself when the world forgets to offer it. Every December, like clockwork, the cards would arrive, candy cane borders, glittering snowflakes, staged smiles of families in matching pajamas. Warmest wishes from the Johnsons. Love and light from the Parkers. They'd fill my mailbox like confetti. I'd hang a few out of habit, out of kindness. But they always left a familiar hollowness in their wake. And yet, one year, a different envelope arrived. No glitter. No return address. Just a plain cream card with simple handwriting on the back, to Eleanor Carter. Inside, a photo. Not of a family. Not of a dog in reindeer ears. Just a girl, smiling, her eyes bright with a future she had once been told wasn't for her. Behind her, the library steps at the university she now attended. Beneath the photo, a note. "You probably don't remember me. I was the quiet one who never spoke during the mentorship workshop last year. You told us we were allowed to dream with our eyes open. That's what I did. This is me, dreaming out loud. Happy holidays. I hope someone's card is on your fridge this year, too." I did remember her. She had sat in the corner the entire session, notebook open, eyes cautious. She hadn't spoken a word, not even during the icebreaker. But she had listened. And now, here she was offering back something no glittered card ever had, evidence. That the life I built had ripple effects I could never fully trace. I placed the photo not on my fridge, but on my writing desk. Right beside the lamp where I often sat at night, reading letters from students, reviewing applications, dreaming of what the foundation might become next. That winter, as the world curled in on itself in darkness and forced joy, I stayed still. I didn't send cards. I didn't attend ugly sweater parties. But I wrote 3 new scholarships. I reviewed every essay twice. And when I opened a new file folder labeled 2026 Cohort, First Generation Applicants, I smiled. Because even if no one ever put my face on their mantle, I had become the quiet miracle in someone else's story. It was a mundane Tuesday when I ran into Marcy at the local market. I was reaching for sweet potatoes, and she was adjusting a large bag of organic spinach in her cart. We hadn't spoken face-to-face in months. The last interaction had been at the wedding, polite, restrained, a murmur of understanding beneath layers of history. She saw me before I saw her. "Eleanor," she said, not surprised, not cautious, just present. "Marcy," I replied with a small nod. "How are you?" We stood there, near the produce, between apples and artichokes, and something softened. Perhaps it was time. Perhaps it was the shared exhaustion of midlife, of pretending to be more certain than we really are. "My daughter applied to the foundation," she said quietly. "The younger one." I didn't tell her to. She found it on her own. I let the silence hold the truth. "She asked me if I knew you," Marcy continued. I said yes. I said you were the kindest woman I had ever misunderstood. I didn't expect that. For years, I'd been the one misread, misspoken of, mishandled. And suddenly, there she was owning it. Not in dramatic apology, but in the steady rhythm of reckoning. I'm glad she applied, I said. She said the essay prompt asked about resilience, Marcy added, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She wrote about you. My throat tightened. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't pretend to be closer than we were. But we parted with a mutual understanding. A bridge, quiet and unseen, had begun to rebuild, not to the past, but to the truth of who we were now. That evening, I opened the new round of essay submissions. There it was, her daughter's name. Her words. Resilience is often associated with recovery, from trauma, from loss, from hardship. But sometimes, resilience is simply the ability to be unseen and still keep showing up. I've learned that from watching a woman my mother once underestimated. Her life taught me that even the quietest builders leave unshakable legacies. I closed my laptop and pressed my fingers to my lips. It was never about revenge. It was always about recognition. And now, even the next generation had begun to see. The letter came on thick ivory stationery, the kind that whispers importance before you even read the words. We are delighted to inform you that the Eleanor Grace Foundation has been selected to receive the State Civic Impact Award for Outstanding Contribution to Educational Equity. There were more lines. Words like transformative and trailblazing and impactful work in underserved communities. It was a tremendous honor. But all I could think about was how little it meant to me now. Not because it wasn't deserved, but because the recognition had come too late to shape who I'd become. For most of my life, I had worked in the shadows, planting seeds others didn't bother to notice. I had poured hours, years, whole seasons of myself into students who came from silence, into letters that were never answered, into applications that blurred at the edges from too much hope and too little rest. I hadn't built the foundation to be seen. I had built it because I saw others. Still, I accepted the award. I wore navy again, my color of calm, and delivered a short speech in a large auditorium full of polished people who suddenly wanted to know me. But what I remember most is not the applause. It's the boy in the back row. He wore a faded hoodie, sleeves too long, eyes bright behind second-hand glasses. After the ceremony, he approached me slowly, nervously. "You don't know me," he said. "But my cousin got one of your scholarships last year. She said it changed everything." I smiled. She changed everything. We just made space for it. He hesitated, then pulled something from his backpack. A journal. Worn. Scribbled over. Full of dreams. "I want to start something like you someday," he said. "I don't have money. Or connections. But I write everything down." I touched the cover. "So did I told him." He lit up. The way some people do when they realize they're not alone. That night, I placed the award plaque in my office. But not in the center. That space still belonged to the letters. The photos. The thank you notes that came stained with coffee or tears. The lives. Because the truest awards are not given at banquets. They are built quietly, day by day, by the ones who kept going unseen, uncelebrated, and absolutely unstoppable.